Hi, my name is Cameron Miller, and this is a reflection for the 14th week after Pentecost. Now, as you may or may not know, I just spent a week back in the Midwest, Michigan specifically, and like here in the Finger Lakes, it's green and luscious from all the rain. And traveling from here to there through corn and soybean fields that flatten the horizon, and then going up north, as they call it in lower Michigan, where glacial hills and lakes thread through the boreal forests. Passing through that land and being near where I walked and fished and played as a child and a youth, seeing the darker, richer soil beneath the longer, flatter, endless fields in Ohio, and then crossing the greater distances, all of it opened me up inside. Kind of like eucalyptus awakes the brain with a rush of air. I had not been to that part of Michigan for 15 years. We saw a young man running up a hill I used to run up, and Katie said, "Hey, look, that was you 30 years ago." So, returning then to the Finger Lakes and to today's Song of Solomon, Mark's story that's really not about soap, was a bit of a jolt. Now, every image of those first two readings derives from the passion of living large with one another in the garden of planet Earth. There is no hint of control, no sense of safety. There's no modulation of tactile sensation. There's no neat square frame around love and hurt and pain to allow us to pretend that loving is a safe sport in which injury is rare or wounds are unheard of. Then there's the gospel story. That gospel from Mark reveals a deep fissure in our religion. It's a conflict that extends at least 3,000 years in the past. It's a bitter argument that has hardened into kind of a Hatfields and McCoys divide witnessed in both Judaism and Christianity. There are such terrible fractures in Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism too, but I'm too much of an outsider there to speak about them. In every religion, in fact, that I know anything about, there is a deep division between purity and prophecy. Purity and prophecy, regardless of what they happen to be called. It's kind of a snarling, bitter, rarely polite argument between priests and prophets. In ancient Israel, it was the struggle between religionists that emphasized personal moral purity practiced through ritual worship and the rules of morality, versus those who were fierce champions of prophetic demands for more equitable distribution of wealth, power, and resources. Now, to oversimplify it, which I already have, do we get right with God by going to the temple and sacrificing a pigeon or a lamb and never eating shellfish, or pork? Or do we get right with God by sharing our resources with those in need and agitating those who are in power to use their power to create a human community that more nearly reflects the love of God? Now, I have heard evangelical preachers say, and I quote here, "Our God washes filthy hearts to be perfectly clean." On the other end of the spectrum, I've heard sermons elsewhere about how church needs to do right by the LGBTQ community. The conflict between purity and justice is alive and well 3,000 years later. The hand and pot washing referred to in Mark's story is not about pandemic hand sanitizer, or whether we use Dawn or seventh generation, or wash by hand or in the dishwasher, or use antibacterial or lavender oil soap. It's about ritual hand washing and separating pots and pans that cook dairy products from those that cook meat products. They didn't know about bacteria and microbes back then. it had to do with maintaining ancient purity laws, as in ritual moral purity. Now, clearly, from this story and others, Jesus isn't big on regulating his disciples. Perhaps he didn't even keep those rituals himself. Who knows? Although it is impossible for us to say from this story. But ritual purity was not a priority for Jesus. Rather, social purity was much more important. Fornication in his day among Judeans of the first century referred to engaging in prostitution. And I'm guessing that the social effects of prostitution upon women would likely have concerned him far more than individual sexual behavior. But what he's saying is this: what we do with our body, how we engage with other people in a relationship, the ways in which we conduct business, the means by which we make our money, how we treat other people, all of those are external behaviors that flow from the condition of our internal life. In other words, and this is what he wanted us to hear, the landscape of our lives, what others see about us, is shaped by the inscape of our mind and soul, the inscape. Deep space, where we live alone with God, is the generator of external action. It's true that what we do begins to shape who we are inside over time, but what we do begins with who we are inside. But here is a little paradoxical twist for Jesus, one that Jesus could not have articulated, since the world in which he lived was dramatically different from ours. But the environment around us has the power to shape who and what we are as well. The environment around us, as well as the deep space within us, has the power to shape us. The environment around us has the power to shape who and what we are inside. If we live our lives in completely protected environments, whether it's a humid climate zone like a mall or an air-conditioned house, or a gated community that protects us from social diversity, or it's a lifestyle in which we simply don't encounter those who are forced to live extremely unprotected lives, then we're going to begin to fall asleep inside. Just fall asleep. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to stay morally awake in a protected environment, but it is much more difficult. The more protected we are from the storms around us, and by storms I mean that both literally and metaphorically, the more protected we are from the storms and turbulence around us, the sleepier our inner mind becomes. The sleepier our inner mind becomes, and the more diminished our senses become. Now I'm speaking here of our spiritual senses. You didn't know we have spiritual senses in addition to our physical senses? I'm talking about compassion, imagination, intuition, reverence. They are the senses. They are the tentacles that reach out beyond us and feel the world around us. Just as our perception is diminished when we lose the acuity of taste, smell, hearing, sight, or speech, when we lose the acuity of compassion and of imagination and of intuition or of reverence, then our experience of the holy in life is greatly diminished. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all go live in a shack or pitch a tent in a vineyard tonight, but I am echoing Jesus' warning that when we fall asleep inside because of extreme comfort and security, then we not only endanger others by our sleepiness, but we also diminish our own senses and diminish our own ability to experience what is truly valuable and what makes life worth living. Now, you do not need me to tell you how to awaken inside, nor am I an expert on how to do it. All we need to do is take a few steps outside of our comfort zone, wherever we are encircled ourselves in them, and that makes us uncomfortable. Whenever we move outside the comfort zones that encircle us. Heck, the pandemic made most of us ill at ease. But all we need to do is practice shutting off the grid of humanly regulated environments from time to time. That'll make us uncomfortable. All we need to do is engage in relationship with people who are not like us or who we imagine are not like us, and that will make us uncomfortable. Actually, and I will end with this, we don't really have to go looking for weapons to poke through our comfort zones. All we need to do is acknowledge and focus on the discomforts we always have with us, within us and around us. Health problems, emotional turmoil, identity issues, work or vocational concerns, relationship struggles, neighborhood problems or squabbles, and just about any issue or dimension of public life in and around us. All of that, when we focus on it, will awaken us inside. We get seduced by so many offers to ignore and deaden what lives within and around us. But if we simply allow ourselves to see and hear and feel, then we will awaken and be led into something new. Being solidly in the prophetic mode, Jesus poked and prodded and pushed his contemporaries outside their comfort zones in order to help them to see with new eyes and envision with a new imagination and feel with others who they had long felt distant from or repulsed by. Honestly, I hope that coming here or engaging in worship through video here, being with one another, with people who you want to worship with, I hope that that does the same thing, at least a little. I hope that poking and prodding and pushing us outside our comfort zone is what happens when we worship, because it's not about comforting us. It is about poking and prodding and pushing us outside of our comfort zone. Here's a little mantra for your week. It's from an unlikely source for me to be quoting. It's from the Chinese evangelical preacher Wang Weifan. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But he nailed it when he said, the boundaries of the Spirit depend upon the narrowness or the breadth of the heart. The boundaries of the Spirit depend upon the narrowness or the breadth of the heart. Leave the protected environments that keep us comfortably asleep, and get uncomfortable in order to grow the breadth of our heart.